first thing I like to do when I talk about testifying and what your rights are, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees 5 rights: speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. And here's the actual First Amendment. It takes it, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or restricting the freedom of speech or the press, or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now we have an idea of where these rights come from. So you want to go testify, or you want a law. What should a law be? Sometimes we hear of really absurd laws. There was one legislator once whose neighbor had a pine tree, and the needles kept falling from his neighbor's tree onto his driveway, and they tried to pass a law to stop that from happening. And it's really not a good law. It's not going to apply to enough people. It was really specific and unnecessary. I mean, just go talk to your neighbor, So what is a good law? It's beneficial, it's necessary, it has an end in mind, it aligns with the goals of the people in the government, it's well-informed, concise, and efficient. Oftentimes, and I've made this mistake myself, we draft a law, we draft what we think will be a good bill, but it has unintended consequences. So you really want to be very concise, short, and to the point to make sure that what you want is what's actually going to come out of the law. It has to be ethical, and it should be transparent. We're not trying to hide anything from people. We want to make sure that what we're saying is what we're actually trying to get done. So there are 3 branches of government. The legislature writes laws, the either governor or president puts those laws into place in practice, and then you have a judicial branch that decides whether or not those laws are constitutional, either under the federal constitution or in Rhode Island under Rhode Island's constitution. So they all have different roles to play. What we're mainly focused on today is the legislative branch, because that's where we're going to go when we go up to the State House. Rhode Island has a General Assembly, and that's where the legislature sits. In the legislature, in Rhode Island and at the federal government, there are 2 houses. It's based on the old English system, where the House of Commons is now our house in Rhode Island, and that's supposed to be more reflective of the people. They can act quickly to things that are going on. The Senate, again in England, it would be called the House of Lords, generally takes and in the United States Senate, they usually take a longer look at things. So things aren't so immediate because they get elected every 6 years. So they sit for 6 years. They're not running for campaign every year the way people who are in the House of Representatives in the United States are. So they can take a longer view. They don't have to be quite as responsive to the whims of the people. And so in Rhode Island, it's not quite that way because both our state Senate and our state House run for election every 2 years. So it's a little bit different in here, although state senators do represent more people in a larger area, so their concerns are a little bit broader than people in the House of Representatives. In the House, we have the Speaker of the House, extremely important person. They decide who chairs each of the subcommittees, and we'll get into that in a minute, what bills go to which committee, and he's very, very powerful. So people generally don't do a whole lot without the Speaker of the House wanting something to be done. We also have the House Majority Leader. In Rhode Island, that's a Democrat. And we have the House Minority Leader, and in Rhode Island, that's a Republican. Again, very powerful people. They've got a lot more sway than other legislators do. As I mentioned, the Speaker of the House puts different people into each of these committees. So there's corporations, environment, finance, health, education, and welfare, judiciary, labor, municipal government, oversight, rules, small business, veteran affairs. The main ones that I'm usually concerned about are finance, health, education, and welfare, and judiciary. Those are kind of the 3 that I end up spending most of my time in on the House side. Because those are where most of the bills that affect us are heard, because it makes sense to go to those committees. In the Senate, very similarly, there's a Senate President, there's a Majority Leader, and a Minority Leader. Oddly enough, both the Minority Leader in the Senate and the Minority Leader in the House are my personal rep and senators. I live out in Gloucester, and they're both from Gloucester. Isn't
that convenient?
It actually is convenient because they do quite a bit for me. So Same thing on the Senate side. They have different names, but essentially they have to hear all those same bills. So these are the different committees that a bill could go to. So a bill, what's the process? How do we get there? A bill gets introduced into either house. So a bill could come into the House or it could go into the Senate. Any legislator can introduce a bill until a certain date. The Speaker of the House and the Senate President also have rules about when and how many bills each legislator can introduce. And so they've been trying to cut down because there are just thousands and thousands every year. So they've been trying to put a limit. Each legislator now can only introduce, I think, 15 bills a year, and it has to be in by a certain date. Now, they can bend those rules, so if it gets past that date, but something's really important, we find a way to get something in. But as a general rule, that's how they operate. So say it goes to the House. The Speaker of the House gets this bill, looks at it, and says, this affects people with developmental disabilities. This is going to go to health, education, and welfare. So he sends it to the chair. He names who's chair of that committee, gives it to that committee for the hearing. When it goes to committee, that's the opportunity for the public and other interested people to go testify, to have their opinions heard. One of the things that you'll hear when you go there is they'll say, we're going to hold this bill for further consideration. That means they're not going to act on it today. They're going to hear about it today, but they're not going to take any action. And they do that just as again, they don't have to do that, but they do that as a rule just so that, I don't know, they can act on it at a later date.
And they do that a lot.
They do it for every bill. They'll hold them all for further study, then they'll hear testimony, and then later on, weeks later could be, when they've decided we want to take action on this bill, we want to vote yes on it. Then it'll come back to the committee, but now you don't testify, they just vote on it and it goes up to the full House. So once it passes through committee, it goes up to the full House. The full House debates it, votes on it, and then it goes to the other House. So in this scenario, it came in through the House, it went to committee, then it got heard by the full House, now it goes over to the Senate, and the same thing happens. It goes to committee in the Senate, and then up to the full Senate, and if it passes both the House and Senate, it almost becomes a law. If it passes both the House and Senate, it goes to the governor. Now the governor has different options. The House and Senate has both passed this bill. They say, hey, we think this is a good idea. The governor could say, you know what, it's not a good idea. I'm vetoing it. It's not going to become law. If he vetoes it, it goes back to whichever was the original House that it came out of. And his veto can be overridden if 3/5 of the people, of the legislators say, oh no, the governor's wrong, we do want this to become law. If he doesn't veto it, he has two other options. One is he signs it, and then it becomes law. As soon as he signs it, it becomes law. And the other is, and this happens quite a bit, sometimes a governor or a president says, I don't agree with this, but I'm not going to veto it. It's the will of the people, but I don't agree with it, so I'm not going to sign it. If he doesn't sign it, after 6 business days, it becomes law, even without his signature, as long as he doesn't veto it. This kind of is a weird map that's very complex and really far away, and you can't read it because it's too far away, but essentially just goes over all the stuff I just said. This is at the national level. Again, it goes into the House or the Senate, gets through that House, goes to the other House, gets approved there, goes to the president. The process is not exactly the same in every state. For instance, Nebraska doesn't have 2 houses. They only have a single House. So there's no Senate, it's just a House. So it doesn't have to go through that whole process. Massachusetts is very similar to Rhode Island. I mean, most states operate this way, same as the federal government. Rhode Island's legislature stays in effect from January, beginning of January. They like to get out before the 4th of July because they all have plans and it's summer and they don't want to be there anymore. But generally they try to get once the budget is done, they'll only stay in session for like another couple of days, maybe a week. So it's usually like first week or 2 of January to the end of June. It doesn't really go much later. They can't have special sessions. Rhode Island is unique in some places have a full-time legislation. In other words, they don't have jobs, that is their job. Other places like Utah, for instance, I was there, they're in session for I think like 3 or 4 weeks every other year. Wow. Well, it's a big state. Our legislators can all drive up here every day. If you live in Utah or Texas or California or something, it's really hard to get everyone together. So they only they only meet for a very limited time. That's a really good question, Tanya. So yeah, Rhode Island is a little bit different in that regards, that we can do that. So that's the process to how a bill becomes a law. Now, how do you actually go up into the State House and make your voice heard? This is actually House Finance. Somebody Deanne was talking about, you can tell that's the House Finance Committee. you can just walk in, and I'll go through kind of what that process is in a minute. But one of the big negatives from Rhode Island is they have to give you 48 hours notice. That's usually not enough notice for people with disabilities, especially if you have to take ride, if you have to set up, your care, and I'll get into all that, but that 48-hour makes it really tough, and we always run into problems trying to get people up. People who want to come testify, but they can't because they can't get there. Yeah, transportation, it's a major issue. Yeah, written testimony is also accepted, and you're more than welcome to do that. You can do both. So let's talk about the rooms. We just talked about the date and time set. So you know that the bill's going to be heard at some point, but you don't know when, and then all of a sudden, on a Friday night, you get notified that your bill's going to be heard on a Tuesday, that next Tuesday. I mean, that's about the most time you get. The rooms, though. So the rooms are all different, and some are more comfortable than others. This is the Senate Judiciary, and you'll notice the senators there are sitting in very nice, cushy, comfortable chairs. And your seats will not be that cushy and comfortable. Also, this room and House Finance is air conditioned. Which is a big issue because in the winter, it's really cold in that building. In the summer, it's absurdly hot. So being in a room with air conditioning makes a big difference. So you want to go testify, they make the rooms just like a courtroom. They make them intimidating. They're supposed to be a little intimidating, like these are the people in power and you're just this lowly person testifying. So if you are going to go testify, we want you to get there early. Seats can go fast. So, and some rooms are smaller than others, so you might not get a spot in that room if you don't get there early. You get there early, there'll be sheets outside wherever the room is that you're going to testify in with your bill number on it. Find the sheet that has your bill number on it and sign up to testify. Find the clerk. The clerk will be right inside the room. If you need any accommodations, let them know, and they will be very accommodating. Many committee chairs have rules about how long they'll let you testify. One, it's a 2-minute, and they actually set a timer when it starts beeping. They're like, okay, no, you're done. But if you say, listen, I need an accommodation, they will give you extra time. It's not a major issue. You hand in your written testimony. You can either send it electronically via a computer, or you can hand it in to the clerk before you go testify. Let them know ahead of time that you're going to be coming and that you need an interpreter, and they should provide one for you. When your bill is called, so you've signed up now, you're in the room, they go through a bunch of other bills. I swear I'm always the last one, so they're late. When your bill is called, the chair will call for other legislators and whoever the sponsor was to come up and talk first. And then they'll go through the list, usually. When your name is called, go to the table with the microphone. If you want to bring notes to assist you, that's fine. Feel free to do that. You probably want to rehearse a little bit first. I got really comfortable with just going and talking. And I saw my testimony because it's recorded. And the amount of times I said, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. And so even people who are used to public speaking sometimes still fall into some of those traps. And so it does help to rehearse a little bit ahead of time. Speak as clearly as you can into the microphone because it is recorded. And so they want to make sure that everybody can hear what you're saying. And so the microphone will pick that up. When you speak, say, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Introduce yourself and why the issue is important to you. Are you for or against the bill? Say that right up front. I'm in support of this or I'm against this. Be direct and stay on topic. I know a lot of people that start wandering during their testimony and it's like, well, you've only got 2 minutes and you just wasted, a minute and a half of that. Let them know how it affects you personally. And this is why I think your off-the-cuff comments are really good, Zachary, because you draw it to like a real personal level. Answer any questions honestly, and if you don't know, just say that. I don't know, but I'm happy to try to get you that information. Restate your stance, I'm in favor of this, and say thank you. Boom, you're done, you did a good job. What are some things not to do? Don't say you're representing a group unless you actually have permission from that group to say that you represent them, and you have registered as a lobbyist. You cannot testify on behalf of other people if you haven't registered as a lobbyist. You can always go and testify on your own behalf. Really try not to go off topic. They don't like it when you just read a written statement. Bullet points are good, some notes are fine, but they really want it to be personal and how something affects you. If you do need to have a written statement though, and some people do need that, That's okay, just let the clerk know ahead of time, I don't have any other option but to read this. Try not to repeat others' testimony. They try to get through as many people as they can. And do not argue with members of the committee or others giving testimony. And this is another lesson I learned really in a bad way. I used to work for the Department of Education, and I was there to testify, and this legislator had gotten some very bad information from somebody, and I corrected her, and then she said, no, I'm wrong. I said, no, I promise you, you're wrong. And then we went back and forth a little bit until she finally said, is there anyone higher ranking from the Department of Ed here? And our finance person was like, oh God, I guess it's me. And she had to get up, and like they kind of kicked me out, and then I got a finger wagging. Anyway, it's just not a good idea. It's not a good idea. It doesn't make you look good. It doesn't get the point across. Try to catch up with them afterwards and say, hey, I heard you say this. I think it might not be that way. But don't get into an argument, especially while you're sitting there. And don't argue with other people that may have just testified. Okay, you're giving your own testimony. Don't say, oh, that person was a jerk when they got up there and said this. It doesn't look good. Written testimony. This is a great chance, especially if they're only cutting you down to 2 minutes. This is a really good chance to go into more detail. You do want to bring enough copies for each member of the committee. So you're going to hand in like 12 or 14 or however many committee members there are. Again, address the committee and the chair and the whole committee. Have the bill number and title at the very beginning so they know what it's about. Identify yourself. Make sure you say, I'm for this or against this, kind of right off the bat. And again, be direct and concise. Like you want to get all this information in, but you don't want to overload people. My wife's a teacher. I know a lot of teachers. And they have this rule, like if I pick up something from the office and I'm walking to my classroom, you've got the walk from there to my classroom to get your point across, because after that, I'm grabbing it up and I'm throwing it out. So, be concise as you can be to get your point across. After the hearing, the legislators may ask that you work on the bill with the sponsor. They may say, hey, the sponsor said this. You came in and said, I disagree with that. Can you work with them until you come to some sort of agreement? And we do that all the time. If there are changes made, there may be another hearing. You can usually follow the bill and get updates through this website, but that's pretty long there. If the bill is important and it passes, there may be a signing ceremony that you can attend with the governor. And that's kind of a big deal, especially if it's something that was really important to you, to go to that signing event. Well, one other thing is, if there is a bill important to you and you say, hey, I really want to get this thing passed, we try to take on restraint in schools and on the adult system. So we want to get rid of restraint. We don't want kids to be restrained. So I wrote a 36-page law that addressed chemical restraint, mechanical restraint, physical restraint, and we introduced that bill and it got killed almost immediately. And years went on, and we talked to the adult side and they said, you know what? This prone restraint thing that you're talking about is really harmful. We're not going to do it anymore. I'm like, oh, thank you, adult DD side. Then we went to the Department of Ed and said, hey, can you not, no, they're not going to do it to adults. Maybe we shouldn't do it to little kids either. And the Department of Ed said, no, we're not going to listen to you. I was like, oh. So we still tried to get this bill through. Oh, by the end, 6 years later, the bill was a page and a half instead of 37 pages. All it did was ban prone restraint, and it implemented some trauma-informed practices. Anyway, my only point is, you don't always get exactly what you want. Sometimes you have to compromise to get something positive done. So we finally did get it through. Some other things to consider: parking. It's Providence. Parking is not easy. There are limited accessible spots. We are working with the State House on that to try to open some up.
Usually in the back.
Yeah, you go to the side, kind of, where the other entrance is. If you utilize a wheelchair, yeah, you have to use that entrance anyway. If not, you can go in the front door. The accessible entryway is around the side. You do have to go through a metal detector. They'll go off at the slightest thing. I have to take my belt off every time. When it's cold, it's really cold in there. And when it's hot, it is sweltering. So just be prepared for that. You probably want to bring some bottled water with you at the very least. These hearings can go for a long time. They usually start around 4:30. They can go, especially when we're in House Finance on the budget, they can go well after midnight. That's like worst case scenario. I don't want to scare anyone away from going. I'm trying to get you guys to come up here. Seating, if their chairs run out in the hearing room, there'll be an overflow room, usually with a TV, so you can hear your name called and come in to testify. Other activities, particularly if there's bills. So I'm up there on like health and human services stuff, right? But if there happens to be a bill that's going to be heard on guns or abortion, be prepared to be absolutely swamped with people. I mean, the whole thing is just packed. It's hard to get in. Those are the ones where I'm like, oh, please don't have the hearing in the same room as me, because it just gets to be a little bit too much. But again, it's something you want to be prepared for. Vote.sos.ri.gov is the website to go see who your legislator is. Okay, good question. And so, like I said, other states, like for instance Utah, they'll have their day, it'll go all day long because they're only up there for a few weeks every other year. Rhode Island, we don't have a full-time legislature. All these people have jobs. Most of them, I would say, are teachers and lawyers, so they can get there for 4:30, for 4 o'clock. What happens is the full House and the full Senate meet around 4 o'clock, 4:30, to go over stuff that they have to for the day. When they're done, that's why they call it the rise of the House. Everybody stands up, it's the rise of the House, and they go to their committees. So it's usually 4:35. You don't know exactly when the committees are going to start. They start when the full chamber ends. And they meet Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And some committees will meet just on Tuesdays, other committees meet only on Thursdays. So, you have a general idea of when your committee is going to be meeting. But that's why they start around 4:30.